Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started on this wonderful Tuesday morning, our select hearing. This committee for select, let's start that over. The committee on the intellectual and developmentally disabled. Good morning, and thank you everyone for being a part of this first meeting of the select committee of the intellectual and developmentally disabled. Today is the first of several hearings I plan to hold around the state. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Assemblymember Jim Frazier, and since coming to the legislature in 2012, I've made those with intellectual and developmental disabilities one of my priorities. This year I asked Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon if I could establish a special committee just for the IDD community. Speaker Rendon graciously granted permission to establish this committee. I'm honored that he appointed me chairman, and I take that responsibility to heart. It is important that you know that the Assembly is listening to this community and wants to be a part of the solution. We will be listening to your ideas and your concerns. Any other thoughts and suggestions we are open to because you are the experts. Select committees are different from standing legislative committees. We don't hold hearings on pending legislation, but what we do is in listening to you, we can introduce legislation with your input. We are here to support you and help move the needle forward because it has been frozen in time for too long. I'm excited to hear about all the system today and how we can improve moving forward. We have experts in their respective fields testifying to their roles, programs, services, and challenges. I hope that as we hear testimony, we will rev up for the next legislative session as we wrap this one up. The number of our IDD population continues to grow, and we need to be able to provide support and services that are essential to this population. With me today are a couple members of the Select Committee. If any would like to make comments, I would encourage you to do so now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your leadership on this issue. I know you are passionate about this, and it's a passion that I share. And I share your overall concern about what are some deficiencies in the overall state support for the DD community. In particular, I'm interested to hear from the director, learn more about how the department operates. The Select Committee process is one that affords the opportunity for Q&A, and really it's a learning opportunity about all the nuances on how the department operates. Anecdotally, I've heard references to unspent funds, $35 to $40 million in unspent funds, not because of a lack of need, but some concerns around lack of service providers, lack of support staff. I hail from San Mateo County, and any knowledge that I have in this arena, which I'll admit is rather limited, comes from work with Community Gate Path, which is our leading service provider in that community. But I have become acutely aware of just how difficult it is to find providers, to pay people what they deserve in such a high cost area like San Mateo County or like the Bay Area at large. So there's some basic cost issues there. There's also a rate study, as I understand it, that is unfolding within the department. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that, but that will take a look at just the cost variations across the state of California. And then there's an ongoing issue around affordable housing, which is at crisis levels in the Bay Area, around the state, in other areas in the state. But it's particularly acute for the developmentally disabled community, individuals whose parents are aging, and those kinds of things. So there's a whole panoply of issues here that I'm hoping that we can, via the Select Committee, explore. But just a note of thanks to the chair for your leadership not only from a policy perspective, but making this a moral issue that we must do better on in this building.
Assemblymember Waldron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also ditto the comments relative to our chair and his passion for this issue. And I'm excited to be part of this committee. It's a very important issue. And just really briefly, when I look at the mission statement, basically it states that this committee will work to ensure the rights and dignity of all people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and shall strive to advocate on behalf by promoting public awareness about the needs and the abilities of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But it also, I think the really important thing is that we'll be able to listen to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We'll actually be able to hear their opinions, what they have experienced, and learn from that, because that'll be really important for us as we go forward, trying to shatter the stigma and encourage better independent living and more services. So thank you so much, and I'm excited to learn more today.
Thank you, Assemblymember. So after the introductions, we'll hopefully have some more members of the Select Committee come. Unfortunately, being August is the busy time of year, and after coming off recess, people are trying to catch up. And as the committee goes longer today, I hope that more members are able to attend. With that, we're going to start with our first panelist. Director Bargman, would you please come forward? As our first panelist, would you please introduce yourself to the panel and then also your title?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nancy Bargman, Director of the Department of Developmental Services. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to the committee members for your time today and allowing me to speak with you. I appreciated the additional questions, and what I'd like to do, I'll go ahead and give you an overview, and I'll try to address some of the questions, and happy to take any additional ones as we kind of finish throughout this morning. I've been asked to provide an overview of the developmental services system and to provide a little context between the differences between the regional centers and the Department of Developmental Services. So I'd like to be able to provide you this overview and take you back a little bit in time. So the developmental service system, as a Department of Developmental Services, we operate in California, and I have a packet for you. And for the members in the audience, and for those that would be interested, we're going to actually post the packet online, so we'll have it on our website where all the material will be available on a link. In your packet, you're going to have an overview of the regional centers. You have a map within the first few pages. We also have our safety net report, and we have some additional information that I'll be referring back to throughout the morning. DDS is responsible for, under the Lanterman Act, to oversee the coordination and the provision of services for just about 330,000 individuals in California, providing supports and services to those individuals who have developmental disabilities. Those are individuals with a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, autism, epilepsy, and also related conditions. The department sets broad policy and provides statewide leadership, establishing priorities, standards, procedures within the developmental services program in which we operate, monitors, reviews, and evaluates our service delivery system. By way of history, the California Developmental Centers goes back to the 1850s. In Sonoma Developmental Center is a developmental center that's still in operation today while it's closing by the end of this calendar year. It was and is the oldest facility in operation in our service delivery system, going back to 1891. In the early 1960s, parents, legislators had taken a look at ensuring that services were going to be delivered differently than within institutions, and taking a look at what those opportunities were. In 1966, AB 691 was signed into a law establishing 2 pilot regional centers, which are now Frank D. Lanterman Regional Center and Golden Gate Regional Center, which is located in San Francisco. The Lanterman Act created a vision for a structure of a community-based service delivery system for the most vulnerable Californians. Our system has really proven to be a model for the rest of the nation and is an example of how services for individuals in a state can be provided within an entitlement system. The Lanterman Act stipulates that individuals with developmental disabilities are legally entitled to a number of rights, including the rights to receive services and supports that facilitate their ability to live in the least restrictive settings in the community of their choice. The system is designed to continue to evolve, and we continue to take a look at what those needs are and meeting the needs of the choices of each individual. Today, the Lanterman Act provides services through a network of 21 regional centers, and again, in your packet, you have a map of all regional centers in the state of California. The law dictates that the department, DDS, and the regional centers have separate and distinct roles and responsibilities. Regional centers provide diagnostic assessments, determine program eligibility, provide support and care coordination, and contract with community providers to provide services for individuals who are eligible for regional center services. Decisions are made based on the needs of the individual, focused on the person, and that is outlined in their individual program plan. By design, the department is not involved in the direct role in the development of the IPP. DDS currently operates as a state department. We operate 3 developmental centers in the state, 1 community facility. We have 2 mobile crisis facilities and operate 2 acute crisis stabilization homes. Under the department's safety net plan, we have a plan to expand the stabilization homes in Northern and Southern California. And the safety net plan is also included in your packet and available on our website. Today, in fiscal year 18-19, the department's budget for service delivery in California is $7.4 billion, of which $2.9 billion is in federal funds and reimbursements. Over the last 50 years, the Lanterman Act has had significant changes throughout the years. It's evolved and has also had some challenges. This includes some of the cuts that occurred during the Great Recession back in 2009 to 2012. Some of these cuts included changes in the eligibility criteria for early start, suspension and limitations to some of the purchase of services to include social rec, camp, and also respite. There was also reductions to regional center operations. There was some rate freezes, increasing parental responsibility, focus on changing and closing the developmental centers, and major efforts to increase federal funding. Changes in the developmental services system is now in a pretty significant, important era of change, and we're seeing a significant transition in our service delivery system. We have reduced the reliance on the developmental centers. We saw changes occurring in 2009 in the reduction and changes of the closure of developmental centers. 2009, the last person from Agnew's Developmental Center moved from that state-operated facility. In 2014, Lanterman Developmental Center also closed. You do have in your packet, there's a chart that reflects for prior years, and I can give you the page number if you would like to just take a look at the changes of the decline in the number of developmental centers and the population over the years. And if you'll just give me a moment, I can even give you the reference of the page. So you can see on page 3 the changes as far as the population within the developmental centers, and then you will also see on page 4 where you're seeing the increase in the regional center population. So in 2012, there was a moratorium of admissions in all developmental centers, and this is an important time in the changes of our service delivery system. Of note is because at that point, individuals with the most complex needs, both with the behavior challenges as well as medical needs, were no longer admitted into a developmental center. This was really the focus then on looking at how are we going to be able to support individuals with the most complex needs within our community service system. We started seeing new models of service that were being developed to be able to address some of these needs. In 2013, under the Health and Human Services Agency, there was a creation of the Developmental Center Task Force to focus on informing us on what was going to be the future for the developmental centers. Shortly behind that was once it was defined as far as the future plan for the closure of the remaining developmental centers, the change in the focus of the work of the Developmental Centers Task Force, focused on the developmental services and making sure that we're taking a look at what is the service delivery system in California, what are the priority areas, where are the pressures, and what are recommendations as far as addressing some of these concerns. Moving forward to additional changes in 2013, there's a law that was signed as far as moving forward with the self-determination program. I'm happy to report that while it's taken a number of years, we are in a place where we're going to see implementation by the end of this calendar year. Self-determination is offering individuals really the freedom and the ability to manage and the responsibility of managing their controls and their budgets as far as how they want to choose the services they want to have within their life. Also in 2013, we saw the Employment First policy that was passed and is now under the Lanterman Act. In March of 2014, there was a release of the new federal rule from the federal government on the home and community-based services, in which compliance would need to be needs to be met by each state in the U.S. that has reimbursement by the federal government for HCBS funding. And so we are in the process of finalizing the implementation of our transition planning, and the requirement of that is in 2021, 2022, that we have to have full compliance for the HCBS final rule. In 2014, as I had mentioned, we moved the last person from Lanterman Developmental Center, but we're also in the final stages of closing the 3 remaining. Sonoma in 2018, Fairview, and Porterville, we would see the last person move in 2019, and with no later than a closure of 2021. We only have about 220 individuals remaining in the developmental center that would be closing. I do want to give you just a perspective as far as the individuals that we serve and why it's really important for us as a service delivery system and understanding. Because as we're looking and developing services and how we move forward, we need to understand the population that we're serving today, but also the population that we would be looking at serving in the future. I had mentioned that we have 330,000 individuals that we serve. The demographics of the individuals that we serve within our population, 39% are Hispanic, 32% are white, 9% are African American, and the rest are within the different ethnicities. We do have a very, very diverse population. We have 23 different ethnicities, and our population that we're identifying speaks about 45 different languages. 48% of the consumer population is under the age of 22. 38% of our population has a diagnosis of autism. 80% of the population live at home or with their family or in their own independent living setting. Within the changes, we are seeing about 13,000 to 14,000 additional individuals within our service delivery system each year. So since 2008 to current year, we've seen a 42% increase in our population. Size of regional centers vary between 3,800 as the smallest to the largest being 34,000. The ethnicity is also changing, where we're seeing a shift where 10 years ago, this is similar to the California demographics that we're seeing changes, is that 40% of the individuals of the population was white back in 10 years ago, representing 32% today. Where this is changing, our Hispanic population is increasing, which is changing from 33% to 39%. This is important as we continue to have an important discussion regarding the inequities in spending within the different populations between white and not white and non-white. So when we're looking at the growth within the population, we also know that 50% of the Hispanic population within the regional center system is under the age of 22. We're also seeing significant changes as far as the growth of individuals with autism. 10 years ago, approximately 37,000 individuals of our population, representing 19%, had autism. Today, we have 100,000 individuals, representing that 38% have a diagnosis of autism. Of note is that 80% of the individuals that are regional centers consumers that have autism, 80%, as I said, are under the age of 22. So as we're taking a look at developing resources, what we do as a department and what we do in working with our community is making sure that we're taking a look at what are the pressures within the system, but also taking a look at how is the face of the individuals that we're serving, how is that changing, and looking forward to how we can best support their needs in the community. You also have available for additional data and facts about the individuals that we serve is in the fact book that is a part of your packet today. In recent years, the legislature and administration have been able to restore some of the cuts that occurred during the Great Recession. Some of the issues that have been able to be addressed is the statewide minimum wage increases that have occurred over the years, and then also with the passage of AB X21, there have been some restoration as far as some services to include addressing early start as well as addressing some of the respite services and some of the identifying how we can move forward with addressing the issues of the underserved communities. We still hear from our stakeholders concerns and challenges within our service delivery system. One of the things that I continue to say over and over is that we are a system of partners. One of the most important things that we do is work with our community and making sure that as part of our focus in moving forward with a plan for how we address services is listening to what those concerns are. We're hearing about the complexity for families, particularly in our underserved community, being able to navigate through the system. We're hearing the demand for increased services for individuals with very complex needs, particularly those with very significant behavior challenges. We see that particularly with individuals that are younger with autism, with have co-occurring mental health issues. We're also hearing that the community-based and state-operated services in operation may need to be increased over time. We continue to assess our safety net to see how we can continue to expand and support the complex needs. We are also addressing the question as far as the rate study. The rate study is due to the legislature in March of 2019. Part of the rate study is that we needed to do a rate survey of service providers. We had working with our consultant that is doing the survey. The target was to be able to achieve a representative sample of about 40%. I'm pleased to report today that actually our community has just done a phenomenal job, and we're very, very close to 50% response rate, which is very incredible, and I really have to commend our community for being responsive to that. Right now, we're focusing primarily on working again with our stakeholders, taking a look at completing the safe transition of everybody within a developmental center, completing the rate study, continuing to work on the inequities in spending, addressing some of the service delivery needs, working with regional centers in the community as far as developing those needed services in targeted areas, furthering some of the efforts on integrated employment, affordable housing, and also making sure we're taking a look at how we can address the sustainable housing. We also want to make sure that we continue to assess how we provide oversight to our service delivery system, and again, being able to be responsive in identifying the plan for the future. I continue to look forward to working with this committee and seeing how we can best answer any questions that you have, provide you information while you do your important work. And I thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of the panel? Mr. Mullen?
Thank you very much for the comprehensive overview. I'm still digesting all of that information. Let me just, since you mentioned the rate study, and I referenced it in my opening remarks. So March 2019, the rate study will be completed. What do you anticipate will come from that rate study? I mean, we don't do studies just to study. Well, I guess we sort of do sometimes, just study things and then don't act. But what do you anticipate doing with the information that is surfaced in the rate study, and what kind of autonomy do you have as the director to make adjustments as you see appropriate, or will that really land back in our lap? How do you view that?
Oh, thank you for the question. A couple of things I'd like to just talk a little bit about, again, the process in which we're also working through the rate study. I mentioned the Developmental Services Task Force. The focus areas within the Developmental Services Task Force includes looking at the rates. And so we have been working with our rate work group and the Developmental Services Task Force to inform us on what that the actual survey would look like. So we're able to put that forward, and they've been working with our contractor. So that information will then come to the department. We will go ahead and work within the administration and present the information to the legislature. So it does go back to the legislature. We will be able to. I don't know what it looks like. One of the things that came up through the discussions that we had with our stakeholders in the DS task force, to use an acronym if I may, was the importance of also doing a family survey, listening to the families in addition and saying, well, what are the important outcomes? So we just recently did an amendment to the contract, or finalizing that, to go ahead and have a survey that's going to go out to families to also have that piece. So together with all of that, we will then take it, digest it, also bring that back within our developmental services work group, and then we will be reporting that out by design early part of this next year.
Any questions? Somebody,
Thank you. Just really quickly, in your testimony, you mentioned the different factions of your whole department and all the different things. There's a lot there. What is, just from my knowledge, a crisis home or an acute crisis home versus the stabilization teams, and just,
Correct.
How do those work on that?
Well, thank you. So within the regional centers, and again, 21 regional centers throughout California have the ability to provide services, a broad range of services. And the regional centers are responsible for providing those services within their geographic area. There are times, however, that some of the needs may be beyond some of the capacity within the services that are provided, whether it's within the regional center services, but also sometimes even within some of the county mental health facilities. We have great partners within the county mental health in addressing some of the issues, but we also understand individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities may have special and different needs. So part of the discussions through the safety net work as far as saying, how do we support individuals with the most complex needs, concerns of the fact that we are moving individuals to the community, was saying the state plays a role, an important role, of supporting individuals. And so quite a few years ago, when we announced the closures of the developmental centers, it was with understanding that there was still going to be some limited operation within the state. One was for individuals that were a part of the criminal justice system, but the other was with some individuals who have very complex behavior challenges. Again, individuals typically with co-occurring needs. And part of that was then the stabilization, crisis stabilization. Very small, so no more than 5 individuals, limited to where there's professionals, and we have a very kind of complement of professionals working within the state that include psychologists, psych techs, nurses, physicians that will work with the individuals to assist, from pharmacology, so the medications, but more on a very positive, informed approach, and making sure that the person has the needs to be able to help them stabilize to transition back to the community. It is time limited. It's no more than 13 months in the state operated. So it's a residential setting currently at 2 developmental centers. One is at Sonoma, one is at Fairview. But because we're closing the developmental centers, we are now going to be moving those services to the community. And so over the next 12 months, those services will be moving to the community. In addition, we established a mobile crisis team. So again, a similar complement of professionals that then are not only, they don't just work within a residential setting, they can go to the community where the person is to help stabilize the situation, to mitigate the risk of the individual going to a restrictive setting, maybe in a behavioral health center, or going to a institute for mental diseases that may be restrictive and not able to meet their immediate need. So the first priority is stabilize a person in their own home where they're currently living, and that would be the intent of the mobile acute crisis team. And then in the event that that cannot occur, then they would be exploring the alternative options. We're reducing the reliance on restrictive settings, and that's why we're building the capacity to address them in the smaller settings, some state operated, some regional center driven. Thank you.
Any other questions of the panel? Director, I want to thank you so very much. Look forward to a real good relationship on partnering with this committee on how we can help each other move forward to the people that we care about the most. And one of the things that is glaringly apparent is that obviously you need more funding because your census is growing, and the ability to for providers. It may have to be a career choice for some people because of the consistencies that are needed by some of your consumers. So we're looking forward to how we can partner and make it a better opportunity for you and us to serve the people that we do care. So thank you for being here today. And like I say, we're going to do this together after 6 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move forward to our second panel. That will be Mark Newton, the Deputy Legislative Analyst, and Sonia Pettick, Senior Fiscal and Policy Analyst with the LAO. Thank you very much for being here. Always love to have the LAO as part of our panels. So please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Sonia Pettick from the Legislative Analyst's Office, and as you noted, this is my colleague Mark Newton, Deputy Legislative Analyst for Health and Human Services at the LAO. We've been invited here today to provide an overview about the DDS budget and discuss some of the recent budget actions and historical trends. And you should have a handout from our office that looks like this. And I'll just be following along to the structure of this handout. Okay. So page 1 provides a brief overview of what I'll be speaking about. I'll first talk about some of the basics of the DDS budget and then briefly discuss how the closure of the developmental centers will impact the DDS budget, and then take a look at some of the recent actions over the past 15 years and some of the future fiscal challenges looking ahead. I'll try not to repeat too much of what Director Bargeman presented, but all of my comments will be from sort of a fiscal perspective. If you turn to page 2 of the handout, the current DDS budget in 2018-19 is at a record high $7.4 billion, and about 61% of this comes from the state's general fund. If you actually turn to the figure on page 3, you'll note the significant growth in recent years in the DDS budget. You'll see there was sort of a stall when budget cuts had to be made during the recession, and you'll also note these rapid increase in caseload growth. But it's important to note that the growth in the DDS budget actually outpaces growth in the DDS caseload, and this is in part due to changes in utilization of services. It's also due in large part to the statewide minimum wage increases, which the state has funded for the service providers in the DDS system. The department receives its funding from the state's general fund as well as from federal funds. And if you turn to page 4, you'll see the relative shares of general fund and federal funds over the past number of years. Federal funds are provided primarily in the form of reimbursements through the Department of Healthcare Services for Medicaid and Medicaid waiver-related services that the department helps provide through the regional centers. You'll note in the figure on page 4 that, again, as Director Bargeman noted, the relative burden on the general fund was reduced during the recession, while the department was able to simultaneously increase reimbursements from the federal government. Since that time, however, general fund growth has outpaced growth from federal sources of funding. If you'll turn to page 5, I'll just discuss the two major components of the DDS budget. These are the same components that Director Bargeman discussed, but we'll again take a look through a fiscal lens. The first major component is the regional center system, which provides the community-based services for DDS consumers. The regional center budget is comprised of an operations budget for the regional centers themselves, which includes funding for service coordinator staff and the like. And it also includes the purchase of service budget. And this is really where the bulk of the DDS budget lies. More than 80% of the total DDS budget is in the purchase of services from a network of more than 40,000 vendors across the state who provide direct services to consumers. It should be noted that before regional centers can pay for these services directly, they must first exhaust any quote-unquote generic sources of funding. So this may include other public sources of funding like Medi-Cal or services provided by public schools, and also private sources of funding such as a person's or family's private health insurance. The other major component of the DDS budget are the state-operated residential and community facilities. This is made up of the 3 developmental centers that will be closing over the next several years. Currently, their budget is close to $200 million, with $120 million from the general fund. It also is made up of the facilities that will not be closing. So the department operates a secured treatment program at the Porterville Developmental Center, as well as Canyon Springs Community Facility. These 2 facilities will remain open indefinitely and currently cost about $180 million, with most of the funding coming from the state's general fund. Finally, there are the safety net and crisis services that have already been discussed, particularly as the developmental centers close and the state has to provide these services out in community-based facilities. It'll be important to pay attention to making sure there are enough resources for those purposes. If you turn to page 7, we'd like to briefly discuss the impact that the closure of developmental centers will have on the DDS budget. It's generally understood that it's less expensive to serve people in community settings than it is to run large institutions. However, there are some significant costs associated with closing these developmental centers. The first are the community placement costs. So the DDS has been provided funding, a significant amount of funding over the past number of years to begin developing resources in the community for the people who are moving out of the developmental centers and into community homes. They also have to pay for just the costs associated with transitioning those folks into the community. There's also the cost to develop the safety net in the community now that developmental centers will no longer be that place of last resort for consumers in crisis. If you turn to page 8, our office does estimate, however, that there will be some net savings to the system once the developmental centers are finally closed. We estimate that in terms of operational costs, the state could save up to $100 million at most from the general fund relative to the 17-18 budget once the developmental centers are closed. There's also the possibility that revenues could be raised through the sale or lease of the properties which the DCs are housed on. But the amount of revenues will be highly dependent on the individual characteristics of each of those properties, as well as decisions that are made by the various governmental stakeholders, including local governments. On page 9, I won't go into all of these since Director Bargeman did address a number of these items, but we wanted to highlight some of the major budget actions that have occurred over the past 15 years. First, to focus on some of the budget solutions that were made during the recent economic downturns. There was namely a reduction in benefits in terms of tightening the eligibility criteria in the Early Start program, and this was in order to reduce caseload growth and thus reduce cost. That eligibility was restored beginning in 2015. Social recreation and camp services were suspended and have not yet been restored. And respite, the amount of respite that an individual could receive was limited. The 2017-18 budget did restore the full amount of respite to any individual. There were also what we're calling restrictions to vendor rates. The most important of these were rate freezes, some of which started in 2003-04 and affecting some vendors, and then others in 2008-09. These freezes still remain in place despite the state providing funding to cover the costs associated with state minimum wage increases and the rate increases that occurred in 2016. We would also note that the implementation of median rates has also restricted the amount that vendors receive. So the median rates are essentially the rates that a new vendor coming into the system would receive. Rather than being able to negotiate their rate based on cost, they have to accept the current statewide median rate for that service or the regional center area rate for that service, whichever of the two is lower. That median rate policy remains in place. On page 10, we mention several other sort of budget solutions that occurred during the recent recession, some of which have been restored, like payment reductions. The uniform holiday schedule was one that took effect in 2009, and essentially, despite it being called a uniform holiday policy, what it essentially meant was that regional centers were prohibited from paying for vendors for services provided on 14 set days per year. This was an issue that came up in this year's budget. The administration had proposed beginning to enforce this policy again. It's been suspended since 2015. The legislature had voted to repeal the policy altogether. The compromise that was reached was to delay enforcement of the policy for one more year. Some of the recent budget augmentations, we don't need to go into too much depth on these, but you'll note on page 11 the major actions that were taken during the 2016 special session of the legislature. Some of these involved rate increases for vendors and increases to regional center operations. There were also some fixed allocations provided for some specific purposes, such as ameliorating the disparities in purchase of service spending across racial and ethnic groups among DES consumers. The 17-18 budget restored respite and provided one-time funding for safety net development. The 18-19 budget provided $25 million in what's called bridge funding, and this is for vendors who are being particularly hard hit by rising costs, and it's meant to bridge the time between now and when recommendations from the rate study can be potentially implemented. On pages 12 through 14, we wanted to note some of the issues looking ahead, and I won't dwell too long in this section because Director Bargeman did already discuss some of these, and I know some of the panelists coming forward will talk about these, but we just wanted to note two factors that are causing shifts in the DDS system. One is the shifting demographics, which will be discussed again. But we would just note from a fiscal perspective, each of these shifts comes with sort of fiscal pressure. So, for example, the rise in the number of consumers with autism and dual mental health diagnosis means it's more expensive to serve these consumers than maybe a more average consumer from the past. We'd also note that there are evolving modes of service delivery, as the director already discussed. Page 13 notes a few of these: deinstitutionalization and moving to a system that's almost 100% community-based, the new federal requirements that the state must comply with in order to continue receiving federal funding, which really tries to increase integration of consumers into the community, and the new self-determination program that is being rolled out. We would note, as has already been discussed, there's the upcoming rate study. One of the reasons for the study is that the rate structure in the DDS system is very complex. It's even complex on paper, just how rates are supposed to be set. There's any number of ways that rates can be set. There's more than 150 service codes. But this structure has been made even more complicated by the budget solutions and subsequent attempts to augment and restore the DDS budget since that time. It's made for a rate structure that is that's inequitable across vendors providing the same services. It's unsustainable in the sense that a number of vendors are struggling financially, and it provides a disincentive to new vendors coming into the system. and it's quite rigid. So the reason for the legislature provided funding for this rate study was really to assess this structure and evaluate different methodologies for setting rates, and then hopefully provide some good actionable recommendations for simplifying the structure. Finally, on page 14, we would just note a couple other issues facing the system. One is this notion of developing resources in the community. Housing has already been mentioned as a problem, but the regional centers and vendors have really been restricted from starting up new programs in recent years due to funding challenges. And in the 17-18 budget, the legislature and governor provided DDS with the authority to use the pot of funding that they get to develop resources in the community for people moving from the developmental centers. It can now be expanded to develop resources in the community for the entire DDS system. So this is an important source of funding and a way for vendors and regional centers to develop needed programs and potentially innovative solutions. There's also the issue of retaining service providers in the system, particularly as they face mostly flat rates over the past number of years, as well as rising costs that are out of their control, such as local minimum wages. This obviously also makes it hard to get new vendors into the system. And then finally, the legislature and the department will have to continue paying close attention to the need for safety net services in the community. So thank you very much for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of the panel of our experts from the LAO? Assemblymember Waldron.
Thank you for making an extremely complex, what could have been extremely complex, more understandable, just the way it's laid out. I was just wondering really quickly, and it might have been, but I didn't know at the time till your presentation. Maybe Ms. Bargeman could have answered if I had known, but the regional or the developmental centers that are being left open, and I'm trying to find them on my
page
notes.
6.
6. The ones that are open on a limited basis, are they, like the Porterville and the Canyon Springs, are those outpatient or are they full-time?
So the secure treatment program at Porterville is really designed for consumers who are under a court order. They've either been declared incompetent to stand trial or have been placed there under another type of court order. Ideally, they will not live there forever, and the department is in the process of developing services and homes to sort of step people down from that facility and then ultimately get them placed in the community. Similarly, Canyon Springs is not meant to be a long-term residential solution. It's meant to be more of a transition and sort of training ground for the consumers who live there. At most, between the two facilities, they can serve about 280 DDS consumers, and there's no plan at this point to close either of those, especially the secure treatment program, which does provide a sort of needed place for people who are maybe in the criminal justice system.
Mr. Medina?
Where is the Canyon Springs location?
It's down in Riverside County, in Cathedral City.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your diagnosis of the system. I really do appreciate your candor. We've always had a good relationship with the LAO and the unbiased approach that you take in giving us information that we desperately need in disseminating how we can be more helpful. So thank you for being here today.
Yes, and please never hesitate in the future if the committee has questions that we can help with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to our third panel. And that's Sandra Smith is the chair of the State Council of Developmental Disabilities.
Good morning. Thank
Good
you
morning.
for having me. As the Assembly member said, I am Sandra Smith, and I'm Chair of the State Council for Developmental Disabilities, and I'm here to give you some information about the demographics. Some of this information you've just heard, but it bears being repeated, I agree. I am a parent of a 36-year-old nonverbal autistic young man who is just recently been put into a position where he can be independent living with assistance from regional centers. It took me 2 years to get there, and I have a background in education, so this is a journey that I'm continuing and looking forward to continuing with my son to lifespan. So the demographics for California with intellectual disabilities, and this is just an overview. Nearly 50 years ago, Congress established the State Council in every state and territory. Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act 2000 authorized councils to ensure that people with IDD and their families designed and access services to support and supports. The Latterman Act established the state councils in California, established over 31 members appointed by the governor, including individuals with IDD, their families, other partners, and state agencies. The State Council on Developmental Disabilities, a 5-year state plan, which I was the chair of, is in the process of implementing the DD Act through the work of its 12 regional offices. We spread our offices throughout the state, unlike most state councils. The plan is developed and stakeholders' input address systematic barriers, employment, housing, education, community supports, health, and safety for persons with IDD. What is the mission and vision of the State Council? Our mission of the State Council promotes council advocates, promotes the implementations of policies and practices that achieve self-determination, independence, productivity, inclusion in all aspects of the community, life for Californians with developmental disabilities and their families. Our vision for Californians with developmental disabilities are guaranteed the same full and equal opportunities, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as all Americans. What are demographics of California? With the California population, it's the full population of over 40 million almost. So, but 630,000 of them are represented from IDD populations. As you can see on the next graph chart, it shows that and people served with the regional centers is 330,000, as Director Bargeman repeated, and of those in the state, there's almost 630,000 that have special needs. What is the state of education for Californians with IDD? To receive special education or related services under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, a student with a disability must be eligible under one of 13 specific categories and in need of services. There is no specific category for developmental disabilities. For example, in California, the total number of students ages 6 to 21 served under IDEA is 666,414, approximately 23,459, or 3.5% of the students in this category would be considered students with an intellectual or developmental disability. What is the employment state for California? As you can look at the graph on the board there, former teacher here, it shows the population of what we have. There's 80%, and those with special needs, 35%, and those receiving services at almost 25%. For 16 to 24, there's similar numbers, but much lower in the services being provided. So what is the state of housing for Californians with IDD? The estimated numbers for individuals by living arrangements are, so supervised housing, as you can see, is the green area highlighted. And alone or with a roommate, where my son is now, he has a roommate. He cannot ever live alone. It's 16%. And fortunately for the state of California, most of the population continues to live with their families, but not necessarily by desiring. The individuals, my son, like I said, it took 2 years to get him in a placement that would work for him. Doesn't mean he wanted to live at home. I couldn't find a vendor to do so. So that is a big cause of housing causes. What is the state of housing for Californians with IDD? Persons served by the setting for 2015, people with IDD living in public and private institutions was over 11,000. Supported living was 25,000. Other small residential groups, 23,000, a little bit over that. So in the state of housing for Californians, in 2016, the average annual income of a single person receiving SSI was $9,156, about 22% below the 2016 federal poverty level, and equal to only 20% of the national median income for a one-person household. That's just not something we can live on. It won't work. In California, 467,000 people receive SSI. The average SSI payment is $889. The percentage of SSI needed for a one-bedroom apartment is about 138% of that dollar amount, and 117% for an efficiency apartment, which would mean that an individual will have to be alone and receive services coming into the home to help them out. So what are the disparities in the purchases of service? As you can see on the chart, it's listed by ethnicity, so American Indian through Asian, African American, Blacks, Hispanic, Native Hawaiian, or other ethnicities, and multicultural. So the percentage of American Indian receiving services is at 0.3%. Those in Asian is 8.9%. African American or Black, 8.6%. Hispanic, 39.5%. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, 0.2%. Other ethnicities or multicultural, 11.2%. And white or Caucasian, 31.3%. That is my presentation for the day. The council members are a group of parents and partners. As I said before, we all have passion, as you do, committee members, and we do appreciate your time and energy on this issue. And we are here for any questions you may have, and my staff person, Cindy, will be able to help too. Thank you.
Mr. Mullen, any questions of the panelist?
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
You have a knowledge of this entire system. What could we be doing better? What do we need to be focusing our energy on? There's lots of different directions we could channel that energy. Where do you see the largest deficiency in the overall structure of how we provide services in the state of California?
For me personally, as I was saying, I struggle with getting vendors to serve and provide for my son. So housing has to go along with that. So all of these factors, employment, if you're not making enough money to pay rent, but you can't get employed because you have issues of how much money you can receive, then it's like a vicious circle. And there needs to be a location where everybody can go and services are provided because you need them, not because you have to fill out a lot of paperwork. I can give you an example of just happened to me recently. Because of a mix-up, my son's services, Medi-Cal and in-home support, were just canceled. I didn't get a phone call. I got a letter. I responded to the letter. But needless to say, I sit here as the chair of the State Council for Developmental Disabilities, but I went a week in panic just recently, not knowing what I'd do if something happened to my son, if he had a seizure or something, no medication. So it's a combination of all these factors, but focusing on the individual. It has to be person-centered. It has to be led by what the individual needs. Like I said, my son, 36, finally living on his own, he didn't want to live at home all these years, but there was no other option for me. So giving options is the biggest thing we can do. And pulling our dollars in the direction of families that serve their individuals at home, making sure they're taken care of too. The fact that an individual is at home does not mean they don't need the same services. That is one of the concerns I have as well. And my staff person might be able to give you some more document numbers and stats.
No, I'd say similar to what Sandra said. When we were looking at what activities the council is going to take under this past year in terms of our policy work, the areas that we consistently heard from across the state where we need to work on the employment system and make sure that individuals can get jobs and retain those jobs. And we also need to address the housing crisis for individuals with developmental disabilities in the state. Those are the two issues that consistently came up with everyone I talked to.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your advocacy for your son and hanging in there. 2 years is a long time, but
Yeah.
you know, it's nice to know that, and it's a prevalent term that I've heard from families that are trying to place their their son or daughter who is aging out of the system at 22 and looking
Yes.
for opportunities. As you know, we've done legislation to create the workforce integration. We'll continue to do so. Looking forward to also working towards the 2022 mandate by the federal government that California has a process in place going forward.
Absolutely.
That being said, obviously we're going to lean on you very heavily because you are, again, experts in your field about how we can better advocate. And as Assemblyman Mullins is saying, we're open and willing to be there. You're the experts, and you have to guide us.
Well, I appreciate that. And just my mantra for the last few years, autism doesn't end at 21. And that's a whole other issue, but I had to put it out there. Sorry.
No, and actually, and again, understanding that life skills ends at 22 years old.
Yeah.
We've got to look at opportunities from that point forward because aging out of the system, the falling off that cliff is not appropriate.
No.
Especially when members of the community who have autism, consistency counts so prevalent. So thank you
Exactly.
very much for being here today, and we look
Thank
forward to working with you both.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We're going to move on to our Executive Director of the Association of Regional Centers, Amy Westling. Thank you for being here today. And proceed when you're ready.
Good morning. First and foremost, I want to take the opportunity to thank the members of the committee for convening this important hearing and for beginning an important dialogue about how do we move forward, not just looking at a specific bill, but as a system to preserve the rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And thank you also to your staff for all of the work that went into coordinating this hearing. Before I move on, I want to take a moment to reflect on something that Director Bargeman said, that California's system for serving people with developmental disabilities is different, that it was, at its inception, a model for the nation. And I want to highlight a couple of ways that California's system is a little bit different. First and foremost, we have no wait lists for entry into the system. In virtually every other state in the country, there are wait lists, and they can be a decade or more long. So the fact that we have made a commitment to every eligible individual is a significant thing. Additionally, in 1985, there was a court decision that solidified that not only do people have a right to entry into the system, but they have a right to needed services and supports that stem from their developmental disability. Another way that our system is different is that there is intentional local control, which is intended to allow each area of the state to drive service delivery that feels best, that is the best cultural fit for their area. But it also enables regional centers to be more nimble and agile than a state agency. We recognized early on in California that not one size fits all, but rather we as a system need to be responsive to individual needs. We need to recognize that people are experts in their own lives, and this concept has come to the forward in the federal government recently, recognizing that we need to plan for individuals' lives with them in a way that takes into account not only what's important for their health and safety, but also those things that are important to the person, those things that help the person to want to get up in the morning and to want to greet the day. We know that demographics play a huge role in service delivery. As Director Bargeman noted, as well as Ms. Pettick from the LAO, our demographics in California have shifted significantly. At the inception of our system 50 years ago, our population was 75% white and 10% Hispanic. And today we're a rich tapestry of various ethnicities and backgrounds with over 40 languages spoken in the regional center system. We know that cultural values drive different choices. We know that in some cultures, the preference is to maintain individuals at home. And as Ms. Smith said, we know that if the choice is to maintain your loved one at home, we as a system have to find a way to support that individual and to support that family, to wrap ourselves around that family to enable them to meet the requirements to keep their loved one at home. No matter what the demographic, the absolute goal must be equal access to services that are valuable and that meet the needs of the individual that arise from their developmental disability. As both Director Bargeman and Ms. Pettick noted, the system is working to try different things, to see what are those things that are most responsive to different cultures. And at the end of the day, we need to, as a state, make a commitment to fund whatever works and to make a long-term commitment to funding those things. And we need to recognize that progress in this area takes time, that there are barriers, there are issues related to service delivery, some of which have nothing to do with the regional center or the relationship with the individual. So it may be that in some populations, there are issues around mistrust of government and the belief that regional centers are government, particularly in this in this political culture. But at the end of the day, we need to meet people's needs and we need to meet them where they're at, rather than try to put them into a box. Director Bargeman noted that the regional center system was initially developed as an alternative to institutional care. In the 1960s, we had over 13,500 people in state-run developmental centers here in California. And as we've heard earlier today, that population is down to under 500. An important turning point in the depopulation of state institutions was what's known as the Caulfield decision in the early 90s, which led to the state committing to not only the movement of people out of developmental centers, but also the appropriate development of alternative services. For instance, supported living services, family home agencies, where an individual moves into the home of another family who supports no more than 2 individuals. Homes for medically fragile children, supplemental staffing to enable regional centers to offer additional supports to keep people in residential settings, as well as the establishment of the community placement plan, which has provided a funding structure to enable the development of needed resources since that time. While the movement of people out of developmental centers is impressive in the aggregate, we need to remember that it's done one single person at a time. The absolute goal is to ensure that each person has everything they need their first day in the community, and that movement isn't just moving them from one place to another, but it's used as an opportunity to enhance their lives. That is the goal. It's not the shuttering of state-run facilities. It is the enhancing of individual lives. In terms of housing, our population is a little bit unique. We don't have specific set-asides for developmental disabilities. There's no special funding stream at this time, in part because most of our population doesn't go unsheltered. If an individual approaches a regional center and requests shelter, there are opportunities for them to move into settings. But we know that there are different expectations and different interests in terms of what people are looking for today. It may be that less people are seeking group living and more are seeking independent living. And the federal government really supports this. If we think back to just 50 years ago, the idea of community, the idea of providing any of these services outside of a developmental center was novel and unique. And we have evolved so that now we expect, and the people we support expect, to be fully included in their communities. And that means regular housing for many of them. California has the highest poverty rate in the nation when cost of living is taken into account. Highest, interestingly, in LA County and Santa Cruz County. Regional cost differences make a huge difference, as Assemblymember Mullen noted earlier. And in no county in the state is housing affordable for an individual to rent even a studio apartment who relies on SSI. Director Bargeman earlier noted that one of the key premises and one of the things that we have long promised people is the opportunity to live in a community of their choosing. But how do we do that if we don't have a dedicated pool of dollars to address the real housing needs? Additionally, Ms. Smith from the State Council noted that just because someone lives at home doesn't mean that's always their choice. So we really have to drill down and figure out who is needing housing and for whom is the unaffordability of housing in their way in terms of them achieving their goals. We also know that those services designed to improve housing access for the general population are overtaxed. In many counties, housing vouchers, the waiting lists for those open once a decade. And the influx of people who are interested in those vouchers is so significant that they do a lottery sometimes just to get on the waiting list. So you may not, after waiting a decade, even get on the waiting list for a housing voucher. We need a more dedicated solution for our population. In terms of the safety net, we know that, as Ms. Pettick pointed out, that certain populations that make up our rich demographics today are more expensive to support, specifically those with autism as well as those who have an additional psychiatric diagnosis. Today, in the community-based system, 11% of people have a dual diagnosis. 18% receive a behavioral medication of some sort. 20% have a special health requirement, and 5% are technology dependent. Since 2012, when there was a moratorium put on developmental center placements, except for in very limited situations, the developmental centers can no longer serve as the backstop when someone is struggling to maintain community placement. A lot of work has been done to develop community resources to meet these needs. Specifically, a continuum of care for changes in behavioral stability, recognizing that what someone needs to maintain their behavioral stability today may look different than what they require a year from now, and that our system has to be flexible enough to respond to those increases as well as decreases in support needs. All of these populations require more regional center staff time for service coordination, resource development, and monitoring. And just briefly before I wrap up, I want to just note that we've heard a lot of information about the funding challenges that the developmental services system has today. Ms. Pettick noted that our current rate structure with its median rates is inequitable, unsustainable, and rigid. The real question is, what impact does this have on real people, on those 320,000 people that are being supported by the system today? We know that the direct work that's done with individuals is often paid at minimum wage, and that those jobs are really complex, especially as we expect that people will have greater opportunities to access the community at large. Assemblymember Frazier noted a couple of times the importance of consistency in staffing. And if we as a system can't pay more than minimum wage, consistency is incredibly hard to maintain or achieve. We need to identify a way to not only pay more robust wages for these positions, but to ensure that this is a career track, that people will stay and see promotional opportunities and find a life full of passion supporting this population. The rate study, as we've heard, is the recommendations from that are due to the legislature in March of 2019. We need a commitment to fund whatever recommendations come forward. As was noted earlier, a study on its own is nice, but there has to be a commitment to take that next step. Additionally, regional center funding formulas for its staffing are also very antiquated, with some of the fixed costs locked in at rates that were set in 1985. A potential source of funding, as Ms. Pettick noted, would be to look at, is there a way to pull in some of the funding from the developmental centers as they close? To find a way to keep those resources in our community and to stabilize our system, not only for now, but for future generations. In closing, we've seen many changes over the last 50 years in our service system. But at the end of the day, we all, the legislature, the administration, regional centers, vendors, families, individuals that are supported, have a commitment to meeting each individual's unique needs, but we all need the tools to do it. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Mullen, you have any questions of our panelist? So when we talk about the staffing levels of the regional centers as a whole, I know each one has its own dynamic. Is there a general number that you guys have that would actually say what kind of staffing levels you're either deficient in and what you would need to do? Because I see that the area that service level or areas are very large, and with 21 centers throughout 58 counties. So is there a service level that you're at now that you can state?
Probably the greatest indicator, the most visible one, is caseload ratios. There's a statutory commitment to caseload ratios that for some populations is 1 to 62, one service coordinator for every 62 individuals supported, and for others is 1 to 66, depending on federal funding streams. And for those who have moved from developmental centers most recently, it's 1 to 45. Today, the statewide average is about 1 to 74, which, if you look at the job of a service coordinator, the job has become more complex, in part because we have federal dollars flowing into the system and the federal government requires intensive documentation. It used to be that service coordinators got to spend a lot more time with people and their families, getting to know them, getting to know their unique dynamics. And the jobs have become significantly more administrative since that time, at the same time that caseload ratios have risen. I think at last count, the service system was about 600 service coordinators short, which makes a difference. Those additional individuals that are on each caseload really do pull away from that time that could be spent to do more thoughtful planning and time spent in more proactive activity.
Seeing that, you talk about 600 the customer service has then been acutely compromised.
I'm always impressed by the resiliency of the regional centers and by the incredible commitment on the part of the service coordinators. But people would do better if they had lower caseload ratios. there's no getting around the fact that it would provide additional time for planning and talking and getting to know one another and really understanding individual preferences, as well as finding unique ways to meet each individual's needs.
Has the regional centers tracked a retention of employees once they've been hired? What's the average length of time that they stay? As you say, there's been a problem with it, keeping employees?
Yes, I believe as part of the ABX 2.1, there was a requirement to track not longevity necessarily, but turnover rates. I don't have that with me today, but I'd be happy to get that to you.
I appreciate it. I think that's one of the numbers that would help us just based on, as you talk, the career choice, making sure that people have an ability that want to work in this complex world, who are trained to work in this world, and that we acknowledge that they need they have a skill set that is valuable to this consumer. So looking forward to that so that we can address it also. But I do appreciate and appreciate the regional centers for what they're doing, and unfortunately with the limited resources that we give them, my commitment is to make sure that we work towards a revenue source like we did with Mesa. Not necessarily a tax, but we did make a committed effort for revenue with the millionaire's tax and for the mental health. So something we have to look at, because we can't always continue to access the general fund with the cycle that it goes through, and we need consistent funding. So look forward to working with you on that.
We look forward to exploring all potential sources of funding. Anything we can do to enhance the system is greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to move on to our employment development for individuals IDD. That will be Will Sanford. He's the Executive Director of Futures Explored. So Mr. Sanford, would you please introduce the individuals that are joining you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Will Sanford with Futures Explored. We support building inclusive communities for over 700 individuals across 2 regional centers. And employment's a very important thing. And as Ms. Wessling pointed out, it's about control. When you're employed, you have dollars that you can spend and you can do. In the 80s, when supported employment started, many things came after that. Supported living, people being able to live independently on their own and do things because they had money and they could work. And people said, hey, that's a really cool thing. So I brought some folks with me. Lindsay Dyba is my regional director for the Sacramento area, who works extensively in employment and has worked on a couple of projects that this legislature over the last few years has put into place, and she can describe those, along with 2 folks who are employed and 1 direct support professional, because one of the challenges about talking about employment is we have folks who don't want to leave their job to come testify in front of you because they don't get paid. So it's kind of this thing, and we have a young woman who is recently employed by the state of California Department of Rehabilitation, and she was worried about having to come here and ask for time off on her 2nd week on the job, and we respected that choice. I offered to talk to the director and say, would he let her come across the street and talk? And she said, no, I'm good. I'll work. And so we have one of our direct service professionals who can report that. So Lindsay's going to introduce our next folks.
Okay, so this is Tony Vickers. He is, well, I'll let him talk about what he does.
Hello, my name is Tony Vickers. Through my local regional center, I was introduced to Futures Explored, specifically their film and media workshop program. Over the course of several semesters I attended there, I gained a lot of hard and soft skills in the various departments in the field. I took a special interest in post-production, and thanks to several opportunities that the workshop and Futures has provided for me, I was able to get a lot of hands-on experiences, both in-house and with outside clientele. And finally, when a opportunity arose where a position opened up in the workshop, I submitted my application and resume, and I was hired on as a assistant film editor. Basically, my responsibilities are to help the students with their various projects, as well as oversee the various films and other videos that we're going through. We're currently editing. So, thankfully, I'm very grateful to Futures for every opportunity they present to me. Thank you.
And next up, we'll hear from Alex White.
Just so you know, I'm very autistic, so pardon if I stutter a lot. So my name is Alex White. I'm a client of Futures Explored. I currently work three jobs so far. One of them is janitorial at the Film Media where Tony works at. Another is working at the VT, which is Vocational Training and Employment Program, which is also with Futures. And there I do office work on Wednesday mornings, and then the next job I do on Thursdays and Fridays is do mail services at the Educational Department and Development Department, Employment Development Department, and so I believe that is pretty much it. And if you're ever curious about what kind of work I do at janitorial, we did do the Film Media did do a video on January, which is called Hire Able, is it?
Yeah, it's on the Hire Able website, hireable.org.
Right.
And then, as Will mentioned, we have a direct support professional here, Dugan, who has a statement from one of his clients.
Good morning. I'm Dugan Irish with Futures Explored. I just want to read a quick statement from one of our employed persons today. Will was commenting on earlier. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak today about how programs like Futures Explored help many people find jobs in our community. Disabled people have had many struggles to reach our goals every day. My biggest goal was to find a steady job so I could take care of my own family. I was trying to find a job with no luck through my own job searching. I joined many job clubs throughout the Sacramento region in hopes to continue my motivation in keeping to look for work. When I spoke with my Department of Rehabilitation counselor, they mentioned to me about an internship program that was offered through the DOR. I jumped at the chance to begin to change my future. Upon working towards getting an interview with the Department of Rehabilitation, I was also working with Futures Explored. I've had to work with some of their staff before on other assignments, and they know how passionate I am about working hard, setting goals, and asking for help when they need it. I hope that my story will touch many people in the hopes that they will continue to reach towards the sky and never give up. Thank you, Kira McCoy. If I could just add a couple things, working with the community in the capacity that I do, I've been able to go and just meet some fantastic people. And these are people that want to go and not only work a steady job, but to be able to go and provide a way for them to go and interact with everybody in the community. Our programs include people that go and work in the fast food industry, or people like Alex that work in general clerical. And they're broadband people, and these are people that deserve jobs. Thank you.
So the internship program that Kira talked about, and also that Alex works through at EDD, is a result of SB 644, which was passed in 2016. So that pilot started last year. We have 6 interns working in various state departments. We've had interns in CalHR, EDD, Department of Rehabilitation, and Department of General Services. We've had 2 hires so far out of that internship program, which is fabulous. Both of them are with Department of Rehabilitation. And so we hope, we see that as a really great pathway for people to obtain not only experience that helps them, but hopefully also state employment, which is a huge goal for a lot of the population that we work with. They see state employment as kind of like a dream job. And it's been, up until now, really hard to get your foot in the door if you have, well, for everyone, but especially for people with disabilities. So that's a really great program that's a direct result of legislative action. Let me keep going. Okay. So Will also asked me to talk about the staffing shortage. I have, as Will said, I've worked in the field for 14 years, primarily in supported employment. And I see staffing shortage as one of the biggest threats and definitely the biggest barrier to employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Currently, in the programs that I oversee in Sacramento, we have over 40 people on a wait list who want job-seeking support. And we just cannot hire staff to serve those people. So that means that they want to get a job, but they're waiting for sometimes more than 6 months before we have staffing available to work with them. This staffing shortage stems from two things, and they are related. And one of them is that our reimbursement rates don't allow us to pay people a livable professional wage. And the other one is that direct support professionals are not seen as professionals. They're not even listed on the Bureau of Labor Statistics as a career choice. If you look at the job duties of a certified nursing assistant, and then you list out the job duties of a direct support professional, they match up line for line, and then the duties of a direct support professional go on even further than a certified nursing assistant's duties. A certified nursing assistant in California starts at about $17 an hour. A direct support professional in the state of California starts at between $11 and $13 an hour. And the biggest difference between those is that certification. Certified nursing assistants are seen as a career choice. It's a profession. It's recognized as a professional field to go into and recognized as a legitimate career career choice. Director Bargeman discussed the increase in the population in this field in the upcoming year. She and others discussed the various service needs that we currently have in this field and that will be coming in the future. The importance of direct service professionals in meeting the system's current and future demands is second only to the people we serve. They're without well-trained, well-paid direct support professionals, there is no services and there is not a system without them.
Cool. Thanks, Lindsay. Will Sanford again. Just sort of to follow up, I did provide for the committee sort of a rough outline of employment, various categories and things that are in there. Some actions that the state has taken have been very positive. SB 644 was one. The implementation of the paid internship program and the competitive integrated employment incentives was great. Our challenges has been in implementation. Legislation sometimes puts in lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of details that make it very difficult on the ground for us to actually do that. You want to know, what's the hair color, what's the eye color, what was their shoe size, when in reality, how many people got jobs? And so helping us relieve some of that would be a huge benefit. To do that, and as Lindsay pointed out, our ability to attract and retain staff is a huge thing. The supported employment rate is the same whether you're in far northern regional center, San Diego, or the Bay Area, which means there's very significant differences in cost of living. So how do you attract and retain staff? The other one is we need the tools, and the chair has obviously led and worked with us on trying to provide opportunities to move people from more segregated situations to more community-based. We got close to the finish line, but was vetoed by the governor. So I think we need those efforts to continue to give us the flexibility. And as Lindsay pointed out, as we move more and more into compliance with being more and more integrated in the community, we have to have staff who are very competent, who are able to follow through, are very trustworthy and respectful of our folks, because there's not a line of sight supervision. in a large, day program or work activity center or other congregate setting, there's a lot of line of sight supervision. But when you take one, two, or three folks out into the community, you're then trusting them. Right now, as I will often say, I have 700 folks that we're supporting right now in probably 7 counties with 200 plus staff, and I'm hoping everything goes well today. It's really dependent on those folks that make those lives meaningful, and that's really the object of our exercise. How do we make their lives meaningful? Employment is one huge key to that. If you look at the statistics, we have 70,000 folks plus who are in day services. We have 5,000 or less who are in support employment individual placement. That's a huge shift that we have to figure out how to do. So one of the things we're hoping the committee can look at is to take that on, and be glad for them to answer any questions for you because they're much smarter than I am.
Mr. Mullen? Well, Mr. Sanford, you and I have had a long relationship, and I have always appreciated your candor and your enthusiasm. I will say that, and your expertise, because you have been a guiding star for me when we looked at the integrated workforce development stuff that we will continue to advocate, hopefully in the next administration, knowing that it is an imperative that we support the community that wants to be supported into the workforce. But could you share with me the 200 plus employees that you have when you look at retention also, as far as only able to pay from $11 to $13 an hour, how long do your employees tend to last?
It's a range. Our turnover rate, depending on how you look at it, is roughly 23% a year. If you go into less than a year, it's closer to 50 or 55%. If someone comes in and really buys into what we do, gets a philosophy and enjoys that, and is willing to work 2, maybe 3 other jobs, they'll stay. And so we have folks, about 40% of our folks have been with us for longer than 3 years. So it is probably the biggest challenge, and it varies radically based on location, based on what the other local economy, being in the Bay Area. I mean, we're competing with the Googles, with Twitters, and all of that. And so it's the choices out there is how do you make it meaningful for folks to be able to go do it. So,
thank you. So, as a matter of fact, through the Special Olympics, I've started a program in my office here in the Capitol, and we've had it for the last several years, is providing opportunities for interns with special needs. And it's been an absolutely wonderful experience, how we learn from them, how we can better advocate in the workforce. But Rudy's over there in the corner. Raise your hand, Rudy, who's with the Special Olympics, who is our Special Olympics intern and is a joy to work with. And I wanted him here today so he could give me feedback also this afternoon on what we can do to actually be a better support system going forward. But we want you guys to understand that we're going to do everything we can to continue to support you in your your abilities to work. We want you to be able to self-sustaining and feel like you're part of it. Can I ask how much both of you make an hour?
Well, for the well, usually for me it's like minimum wage, so for the hours that we work at, so for janitorial on Mondays and Tuesdays I work when the classes that they have there are over for the day, which is at 3, and then I work for 2 hours on Mondays and Tuesdays. On Wednesday mornings it's 3.5, I think, 8:30 to 12, and at the VT office, and then at EDD, which is the one down Capitol, I work from 9:30 to 2:30 so on Thursdays and Fridays.
And do you live at home?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Let's see. I believe I currently work 12 for $12 an hour right now. I work 5 days a week, about 5.5 hours a day.
Do you have health benefits?
I believe I do. Yes, I do. I also have health benefits with that I helped that I got through that I'm getting through Futures. Yeah.
Thank you. And do you live at home still?
I currently live with my sister and her boyfriend, but I do pay rent.
Good for you.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for this panel. It's been enlightening, and again, you are our champions. Keep going. I appreciate it. Thank you. So we are going to move on to our safety net and consumers in crisis. Evelyn Abu Hussein. I butchered every time.
Everybody does. We're consistent. Bear with me.
Absolutely.
I'm usually quite skilled. Maybe not today. I'm going to parallel park and get out. Is that sufficient?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to tell you in a second. You got me? Hang on. I got it. I got it. Don't let me. We're good. We're good. Here, let go. Pull the chair back. Pull it back.
Okay.
Chairs with wheels. Always fun. Thank you. Just Good morning. My name is Evelyn Abu Hassan. I'm the Senior Legislative Advocate for Disability Rights California. I was asked to talk a little bit about DRC and the work that we do, and then talk a little bit about the safety net and crisis services. So let me start by saying thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to testify today before the Select Committee on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. As I said, I'm Evelyn Abu Hassan. I'm the Senior Legislative Advocate with Disability Rights California. Disability Rights California, DRC, is the agency mandated by federal law to protect and advocate for the rights of Californians with disabilities, including those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy, OCRA, also provides advocacy services to consumers of the Regional Center through a contract with the Department of Developmental Services. DRC provides legal and other advocacy assistance to approximately 25,000 individuals in 2017, including 11,331 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We provide both systemic advocacy and individual advocacy services. In addition to the positive outcomes we achieved, our work this year resulted in about $5 million in services and benefits to Californians with disabilities. Our Regional Center clients' rights advocates have the statutory responsibility to represent individuals living in restrictive arrangements, and it's these individuals who most often experience behavioral challenges as a result of crisis. I'm not going to talk about the history of the developmental services system. I think you've heard a lot of that today. So what I'd like to do is just talk more about the safety net and some of the recommendations that Disability Rights California has. As a result of the Developmental Service Task Force convened by the Health and Human Services Agency, there's a clear consensus about how the developmental disability system can effectively respond to crisis that individuals face. In 2017, the Developmental Services Task Force report identifies the goals of the DD crisis response system to be ensuring consumer safety, which includes protecting individuals from harm and abuse, and providing appropriate crisis intervention and response. While a wide variety of circumstances can result in individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities ending up in crisis, such as the termination of a current living arrangement or support services, an increase in behavioral challenges, or a psychiatric emergency. The task force report identified an effective crisis intervention system must include preventing a crisis from occurring, including maintaining individuals in their homes and developing models of support to prevent an individual from becoming involved in the criminal justice system or needing more restrictive level of care. The department's May 2017 safety net report, which Ms. Bargeman referred to, estimates that there are approximately 200 individuals at any given time who are developmentally disabled and are having a crisis. Currently, these individuals are served in mental health facilities, institutes of mental disease, or state-operated acute crisis centers. In addition to these individuals, DRC knows of hundreds more consumers who need crisis services but have not yet reached the criteria that makes them eligible, but may reach that criteria level if appropriate services are not provided. So how do we assist constituents and others that reach out in crisis? Individuals in the community who experience or are at risk of crisis should receive crisis intervention services from their local regional center. Disability Rights California's Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy may be able to assist in ensuring that individuals receive these services. An important first step to ensure that individuals are appropriately assessed. One strategy for individuals who are at risk of losing their community placement is to ask their regional center to refer them for an individual assessment pursuant to Welfare and Institution Code 4418.7. This evaluation carefully examines the behaviors and services needed to maintain the person in the community. The goal should be to keep the individual living in their home or their residential living arrangement with additional services to address their behavioral challenges. The nearest regional resource development projects conduct these assessments. For individuals with the most significant behavioral challenges, the department, as already noted, has created the Northern and Southern STAR, which are the Stabilization, Training, Assistance, and Regeneration Homes, and the STAR Crisis Assessment Response Team, the CAST. And while these services include well-trained staff, they are located a long distance from the consumers and cannot be always the initial first responder in a crisis. And while we understand that there are 2 community crisis homes that are running, the availability of beds is extremely limited. There are a number of enhanced behavioral homes. Again, these are 24-hour residential facilities that have been established. However, currently they are primarily filled with developmental center movers. So the need for increased funding in the community for safety net services. We do appreciate the progress in implementing the safety net plan, including developing the new models of care. However, we do note that there are significant gaps that remain, and that for some individuals, the crisis system looks more like a patchwork of services operated by different agencies rather than a comprehensive system that will meet the DS task force goals. And for example, in some regional center catchment areas, there are very few local crisis response services, and while the DDS mobile crisis team can help identify interventions, it cannot quickly respond in cases of emergencies in all areas. In addition, we know that in some counties, mental health departments and county-designated mental health facilities decline to serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Because of an incomplete system, these individuals often end up in places like locked institutes of mental disease, which have a very high usage of seclusion and restraint. And we are aware that some regional centers who do not have other options are using what's known as hotel therapy, which places an individual in crisis in a hotel with 2-to-1 staffing and 24 hours a day. We remain concerned that additional safety net capacity there needs to be additional safety net capacity, and that the current capacity is insufficient to meet the need. We continue to believe that increased safety net funding is needed to support the development of local crisis capacity so that individuals with significant behavioral challenges can be supported at home or in their current living arrangement with in order to prevent placement in restrictive settings like institutes for mental disease or other mental health facilities. Thus, we suggest that the funds need to be targeted for the following types of services. Mobile crisis services in each regional center catchment area. Again, we talked about these services. They are now available, but they are very hard to access in each regional center area. Comprehensive individual assessment, planning, and tailored services for individuals in crisis to provide a continuity of treatment, treatment supports, intensive monitoring, case management, and I think Ms. Westling talked about this, reducing service caseload ratios for this population of individuals. Development of intensive wraparound services for persons with co-occurring developmental disabilities and mental health needs. These are individuals that have dual diagnoses. These services will allow individuals to successfully prevent admission into highly restrictive settings like institutes of mental disease. We continue to be concerned about the lack of movement from individuals out of institutes of mental disease. They often stay there beyond the statutory timeline of 180 days. So too often, regional centers do not develop plans to move these individuals out of these types of settings. And finally, increasing the number and types of community crisis living arrangements available in the community for this population of individuals. These are individuals with high needs, and again, we need to see more community living arrangements for them. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, being the last person today.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, and I have to acknowledge that the safety net is imperative with the this population being able to be served to an extent where if there is a need, it is instantaneous because of the fragile state that some folks get in, and again, the behavioral aspect, they could get in more trouble if you're not there to catch them. So I look forward to my colleagues and I working with you in this committee, working with you, where we can look at how we can improve that safety net also going forward, and look forward to your expertise.
We've provided some detailed materials in your packet today. Please feel free to reach out to us at DRC for any kind of technical assistance that we can provide.
Oh, definitely. We're going to be using you as a reference point for a lot of things where, and the communication continues throughout the recess until the next legislative cycle. Like I say, the whole point, I think, is to make sure that we hear the community. And I asked the legislature, the assembly, for at least one bill to be carried per assembly member for this community. And if you think about that, it's 80 bills going forward with a commitment to catching up and making sure that we make a comprehensive approach where we can connect the dots and show that it's time to catch up. So I really appreciate working with you, and thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. So what we'll do is move on to our public comment. Any individuals in the public that would like to make about a two-minute comment each, come on up to the mic. Sergeants will help you. So what I'll do is ask you to state your name and where you're from, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're here for.
Hello, my name is Mohammed Rashid. I am representing Valley Mountain Regional Center, and I am a consumer representative on their board of directors. And I'm here to talk to you guys about the biggest trouble that people with developmental disabilities have is transportation, because it's so limited, and the time of that the services are available, it's not very conducive to a person with developmental disabilities life. They the time limit is very short. Like, there's not enough time for a person to have fun, especially on the weekends when there's no transportation for people with disabilities. And there's also not enough training with bus drivers. I've noticed that some drivers don't know how to really appropriately treat people with disabilities. I've been a victim of that. But not only I would like to see more of a open time of transportation where there's not any limit of transportation for people with disabilities.
Thank you. We'll look forward to working with you on that.
All right, thank you.
Please state your name and who you're representing, please.
Hi, my name is Jackie Dillard-Foss. I'm with the California Supported Living Network, and I'm also a provider here locally in the Sacramento area with the STEP program. One is, you talked about the workforce. You asked about turnover rate. I was just invited to the American Association for the Intellectually and Developmentally Disabled. They say they have too many letters in their name, to the national workforce crisis. And what they reported there was nationally they're seeing a 40% turnover rate. If you're looking at different models, residential, Utah, for example, their residential model, you're seeing an 80% turnover rate. I know that if you look across California, you're probably hitting the 40 to 50%. You have to look at the models of care and the wages as well. So the workforce crisis, the Supported Living Network has determined two things: the workforce crisis and the housing crisis. If those aren't solved, currently I have 20 individuals that want supported living from my agency, and I can't provide it. I can't provide it because I don't have staffing. I can't provide it because I don't have housing. I was on a thread with a provider from Santa Cruz. She has a gentleman that was in a Section 8 housing for 20 years. They remodeled the housing unit. He is in a hotel. Then another person piped up there in Orange County, 30 years, Section 8 voucher. They remodeled the unit. They are now homeless as well. My agency has 2 individuals with physical disabilities, both with vouchers. Both do not have housing right now. It is an absolute horrendous statewide crisis. It's from Sacramento to Orange County to the Bay Area to Santa Cruz. You can even go into Redding. I serve folks in Yuba City. It's a housing crisis. Folks cannot live. And if you think about the housing crisis, I want you to apply it to a direct support professional who's now making $11 to $13 an hour, because that's about the average. Where are they living? Where are they living as well? So we have to address within our population the housing crisis and the workforce crisis. I agree. Employment is critically important for all of our folks to have they need to have a wage that's not just, I have minimum wage for 5 hours a week. They need a full-time job to be able to survive in this economy right now. So we have to address those 2 issues. We have got to address the wages. I think Lindsay with Futures Explored said it really eloquently. They are not even looked at as a professional. Look at the list of what they do. We're talking about folks with very complex needs. I'm fortunate in that my agency will open one of the crisis homes. August 13th will be the first person coming into one of those crisis homes. And the wages for those staff is going to be a wage that will probably be livable. But I have people in supported living right now with the same complex behaviors that we have muddled together support for years and years. Folks with autism that have very significant behavioral crisis, and most staff know, I walk in the door and I know today I'll probably be hit, and I'll probably get paid $13 an hour to be hit. So we need a state of California to decide we respect these professionals, and let's make their wage reflective of the respect that they should expect. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name and who you're representing, please.
My name is Jamie Davis. I'm the Executive Director of Marin Ventures. It's a small day program in Marin County in San Rafael. I started out 31 years ago this week at $5.23 an hour as a residential technician in an intermediate care facility. I had a college degree, and my parents were like, what are you doing? But it became a profession for me, and I feel like I've had a lot of lucky breaks that I can afford to live where I work and have a great job. I appreciate your time and attention to our concerns and challenges. A most recent challenge in this sort of Winchester mystery house, to quote Will Sanford, of our rate-setting methodology is half-day billing, which was re-implemented this year. We do a lot of administrative tasks to find out, for 4 people for 3 days, we have a half day of billing. For other agencies, it might be more. The hard thing is we can't do half-day payment for our staff. So they come in the morning and they expect to work the full day, and they do. Even if our clients, only spend 65% of their day there, and we only get half the money. When we talk about challenges like this, like the holidays that will be implemented next year, people in other kinds of businesses say, well, then why are you still in business? How are you still in business? And I would say deferred maintenance of our buildings, cutting back on frontline supervision, low wages, compromised benefits for our staff, and basically robbing the proverbial Peter to pay Paul, Paul to pay Peter. It's like, I'm still struggling with my budget this year. And the reason I've been in the black the last couple of years is I basically have a 20% staffing deficit, and that's helped me get through the last 2 years. And not everybody is still in business. A day program in Marin County is going out of business this month. I think the more important question we say, well, how are you still in business, is why? Why do I do this? Why did I work for low wages myself to get to where I am today? Is because the people. I love the people. Some of them, like my own family, I've known since I started in the field. And I know other providers in this room that have jobs where they feel joy every day. And not everyone has that. And not everyone has the rich relationships at work that we're able to develop for the clients. So why we're still in business in spite of the challenges is because we love the people we serve. And I hope I get to continue to serve them for about 20 more years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. State your name and who you represent, please.
Thank you. Sandy Soliday. I'm the coordinator of the Alameda County Developmental Disabilities Council. It's a program and policy planning unit in the Public Health Department. I believe there are 2 left in the state of California. I want to talk very briefly about the workforce issue and the safety net issue. Just to give you a little snapshot, and I don't think there are many legislators left in California who haven't heard me say my dog walkers make more money than direct service professionals. Currently, I pay $27 for a half-an-hour dog walk. If that doesn't resonate with you, then I will say that my clerk on a county clerk salary makes more money than his job coach. We will appreciate the rate study. We appreciate the LAO report. But bottom line is our system is based on a minimum wage model. And until that changes, we can't get the workers that we need. I have some data that when I heard this, I thought it was fascinating. This is from Alegria Community Living. Alegria has 8 homes and 26 residents in their homes. The residents are former Agnus and Sonoma Developmental Center. So in one fiscal year, when they were looking for staff, they reviewed 3,730 resumes. They did 2,000 plus calls to 702 potential candidates. 49 candidates were no-shows, 33 candidates interviewed and not chosen, 37 candidates interviewed and hired, 11 terminated, 14 other staff terminated. So that's 1 year of an agency that serves 26 residents and has 8 homes. So that, again, is a snapshot. Just then very quickly about the safety net services. From Alameda County, our residents will receive little or no benefit from mental health services outside the county. Currently, Alameda County has, if not the highest, one of the highest 5150 rates in the state of California. I want to tell you about one of my board members' son. He reached transition age, he became activated, and he became dangerous. She called 911 one evening. They took him to, usually they take him to John George, they get bounced out of John George Psychiatric Hospital. This time they take him to the Fremont Kaiser ER. He spent a week in the ER. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital because Alameda County at that time, Regional Center of the East Bay, only had 1 crisis home, and there were no beds of the 4 beds in that home. Finally, he was able to go. We need those services too. Thank you.
Please state your name and who you represent, please.
Dan Hogue, Executive Director of Los Trampas in Central Contra Costa County. We serve approximately 120 individuals in adult day programs, adult residential, supported living, and independent living services. I think one of the issues that, while the rate study is coming out, that we need to also examine is the actual structure on the vendor codes and the limitations that it places on vendors in the services that they actually provide. So as we move towards self-determination and individuals are choosing the services that they want, one of the things that we need to remember is that vendors now need to become very flexible in customizing the services to the individual. So if you're saying that, if you say that you're providing an adult day program services, which is very defined and so forth, but the individual wants to also do other things throughout the day as well that are not within that, we need to look at those service codes. And I agree with everybody here regarding the staffing. Our day program, we're down 33% on our staff right now. We have the programs for people to attend. We just don't have the staff, and we can't staff them. The other day, I had to actually provide independent living services to one of my staff because she came to me and told me that she lost her housing, and had to provide to her the coaching and the mentoring and the resources that I would to any of our the clients that we serve to help her find housing for herself. It's unsustainable, you know. Again, 33% down in my day program, 25% down in supported living. I've had 100% turnover in my ILS program in the last year. This is unsustainable. It really needs to be addressed. So I thank you for putting this committee together to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marty Emoto. I'm a family member. My older sister had developmental disabilities, also worked in the system 45 years ago as a direct care worker, and I'm with the California CDCAN, California Disabilities Senior Community Action Network. 45 years ago, I was a direct care worker and I had to hold 2 different jobs to support my family. And I guess a lot of things have changed in the system since then. But one of the things that didn't change is that people still have to work 2 jobs or find ways to support their family and trying to help and support people with disabilities. First, I want to thank you, Mr. Frazier, and you, Mr. Mullen, and the staff. And the other members of the committee for doing this hearing. But I think it's more about your commitment that makes a difference, which is that you're committed for the next 6 years or maybe longer if you can find a way to stay longer. So, I don't know, you never know. To really do and drill down on the issues impacting our community with ongoing hearings, especially those in the community, because a lot of people, if you can tell from this room, a lot of people can't make it up to Sacramento, and I really appreciate the fact that you're committed in doing that. Number 2, just want to say you were asking for some steps, what people can do in the legislature. Make sure that we're included, our community is included in other policy initiatives, such as the broader housing package that was passed in 2017, but there will be other housing bills that we should be included. There's issues of higher education, online community college. Our workforce, our people with developmental disabilities need to be mentioned in those things. Emergency response, such as the fires. I know that sometimes we're mentioned. We need to be mentioned because that directly impacts our community. Number 3, regarding housing, and I won't repeat everything that the other people said, but when you think of housing, please think also of our workforce. The previous speaker just mentioned in a situation that is not uncommon. Our workforce is paid very low. They cannot afford housing. Many of the workforce are in Medi-Cal, and they need assistance. In addition, our families with young children with developmental disabilities need housing, and they're not included in all those numbers that you just heard. Third, we appreciate the efforts of the department regarding the rate study and the other initiatives. But want to make and applaud the fact that they're including a family survey. We want to make sure that we're included the families are included in helping to construct that survey. But we also want to urge the department and the state to include people with developmental disabilities in that survey. And also, when you survey the families and the people with developmental disabilities, you're surveying not just the services they get, but the services they aren't getting and the services that they desperately need. And the other issue is we've been talking with the department is pushing with focus groups across the state to talk about the rates. And that would include regional centers, providers, and families and people with developmental disabilities throughout the state as another way to provide information to the legislature on how to fix our system and make it sustainable. Lastly, just want to emphasize again over and over what you heard about safety net issues, but it's really about responding to crisis. My sister was in crisis 14 years ago, and prior to that, she was in constant crisis. My family had nowhere to go, and that is the thing that, as Sandra Smith mentioned, families are desperate, and we got to have a way when a person with developmental disabilities or their families in crisis, there is a place for them to go and receive help, and appreciate all you're doing. Thank you.
My name is Audrey Sadum. I'm from Future Explorer. I just want to talk about the transportation issue. I was on the bus for 2 hours, and when we got there, when we were trying to leave, I didn't have a bus to come and get me. No driver was available, and I had to wait 2 more hours to just get home. And it's horrible when I want to go out to have fun. I have to wait for the transportation to get there. I just want to say, please help with the transportation issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon. Jason Parks, Futures Explored, and now one of Will's 40%. Just past my almost 4 years now with the company. Yeah, I'm rare. No, I shouldn't say rare. One of the things that we've been talking about is employment for our adults with disabilities. To see the success with setting up independence for all of the guys that I've serviced and helped get jobs, it's just really rewarding for myself to see that with them and their success. But the one thing is that when I describe my job to some friends and family, they say, oh, that's so great, that's so wonderful. Oh, tell me some more. How can we work for you guys? And then I say, well, you know, money is kind of an issue right there. That kind of turns them off to our profession, which I believe that I'm a part of right now. To have the passion for what we do, it is a profession, not just a job. It's an adventure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Teresa Anderson with the ARC and UCP California collaboration. First, I would just like to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee for your dedication to these issues. We really do appreciate your time and your effort in this. You know, you're in a very unique opportunity to hear the issues, and you've heard many, many of them here today. You'll hear quite a few more, I'm sure, as you have more hearings and listen to the stakeholders. But, you know, you've heard from workforce to, at the ARC and UCP, we take calls every week around issues around workforce, housing, criminal justice. You know, Marty made a really, really good point about making sure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are included in all legislation where relevant. And I think that if there's one takeaway, I think that could be the hugest one, because that would cover everything, from transportation to housing to workforce. Just that knowing that there's a need to look a little deeper and ensure that there's full inclusion across all policies. So again, I just really want to thank you for your time, your effort, and we want to be here for resources as you need us as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mullen, you have any closing comments?
Just very briefly, Ms. Chair, grateful to you for your leadership, grateful to everyone in the room for sharing your expertise with us. The nature of this job is that we are generalists, and we rely on the expertise of those of you in the room. So thank you for that. Like the chair, I'm on that 6-year time frame, so I am fully committed to working this issue at least for those 6 years. But we are also in a window right now in advance of a recession where we have resources, we have a rate study coming. We do have an opportunity here to push this aggressively, Mr. Chair, and I would like to utilize that window while we have it, and we do have resources to stabilize this system going forward. So thank you. I look forward to partnering with you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. And again, thank you everyone for being here today. The passion and dedication for this community is felt in this room and amongst us. Today's testimony has highlighted the need for increased support dramatically. And I want to thank the Executive Director and her team for being here today from DDS. I saw notes being taken, and I look forward to a collaboration with the legislature, with DDS, making sure that we accommodate and make sure that we're going forward and not standing still anymore. With the increase in population, we have to move forward, as Mr. Mullen has said. Yet the number of our individuals is continuing to rise. We have to acknowledge that something has to be done. When you look at rates still being set, retention of providers and employment being a huge factor of providing services is not acceptable. So over the last decade, an average of increased rate of 3.7% annually, we have seen about 100,000 new consumers enter the system. More than 320,000 are being now serviced, and we should expect to see many more. This is not accounting for those who are not currently being served. That's something that's criminal if we're not serving somebody that we dedicated or promised we would. There have been recent budget augmentations to meet demands, but they are temporary fixes to long-standing problems, and they're only very segmented augmentations. I look forward to hearing about the results from the rate study once it is completed, and I'd like to see it even before March, if possible. We open back up in January, Madam Executive Director. Personally, I would like to delve into some of the concerns regarding shelters and housing for individuals, IDD, and I do have some ideas, being a former general contractor. After adjournment of this year's legislative session, I'll be working hard to connect people throughout California on this issue, throughout California's areas. As we move forward with this committee, here are some additional goals I want to accomplish. Promote public awareness about the needs and abilities of individuals in the IDD community. Recognize the IDD individuals have made profound contributions to California at all levels of society, and collect and share information about the IDD community in order to educate legislators, their staffs, and state policy members. As Mr. Mullen will state or collaborate, every time we're in caucus, I'm beating the drum, as he is also, with our colleagues about how we can improve support for the IDD community. Through that coming up, that's one of the reasons I selected each individual on this committee to serve, because of their passion and what they've done in caucus and in their personal lives of how they've helped the community. We want to strive to also shatter the stigma associated with having an intellectual or developmental disability and promote full community integration and improve employment opportunities to IDD individuals. We're going to continue to do legislation on workforce development and integration for the IDD population until it sticks. I'm not giving up. We are all one, and we are stronger together. When I did the dyslexia bill 3 years ago, they told me not to do it. There would be opposition, it would never pass, and I wouldn't give up. But you know what, how we got that through? When we were in committee, there was 150 mothers in their lime green shirts at committee, and you think those committee members were going to tell those mama bears no? This is what we have to do. We have to stick together. We have to be a force of one. And with this legislature having the opportunity and impending opportunities we need to move and move fast in the next legislative cycle. And I look forward to being part of that process. And I look for the partnership with Mr. Mullen and our other community members. We will be doing hearings throughout California, starting in San Diego. We don't have the time frame, but I'd like to do San Diego, Los Angeles, Fresno, Sacramento, Redding, and looking for the North Coast areas also, and so that we can talk to the folks throughout California. But this is my commitment. In 6 years, I hope we've made some remarkable gains moving forward. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you going forward. And again, thank you for being here. If you lost salary today, I apologize. And if you didn't, good for you. Thank you again, and we'll look forward to working with the community. We're adjourned.